As usual, we're here at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. It's a beautiful day, and we have an audience as well. I hope out there too. If you're listening live, as usual, you can email in questions, and we encourage it. Hope you will. Put your first name and where you're from so we can shout out to you and say hello. And if you have a question as the show goes on, especially in the second half, raise your hand, and I'll try to remember to get to you. But I have all these questions myself, and sometimes I get into that. If you're on the archive, we may have books signed still, first edition signed for you. So feel free to call us or email us, and we'll see what we can get for you at that point as well. And watch the rest of our archive also. We have some of those books too. So today we're honored to have two wonderful authors because they've made wonderful books. Kevin Levin is a teacher of U.S. history, a writer. Many articles have appeared in the Atlantic magazine, in all the usual suspect Civil War magazines, thankfully, Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, Southern Historian, and others. He's contributed to books such as Virginia at War, 1865, The View from the Ground, Experiences of Civil War Soldiers. But more importantly, at this point, he's the writer of the well-known blog Civil War Memory, and we hope you will go on that and contribute and follow Kevin on that trail. Today, we're featuring his first book, Remembering the Battle of the Crater, War as Murder. It's University Press of Kentucky, 184 pages and $35. And a good read. Glenn LaFantasie has been here before, Master's in American History, University of Rhode Island, PhD from Brown University. He is presently the Richard Crockett Family Professor of Civil War History at Western Kentucky University. He's the author of Twilight at Little Round Top, Gettysburg Requiem, The Life and Lost Causes of Confederate Colonel William C. Oates, Gettysburg Heroes, Perfect Soldiers, Hallowed Ground. Today, his latest book is an edited book, which is a book of John Y. Simon's essays that Glenn has put together. It's called The Union Forever, Lincoln, Grant, and the Civil War. Also, the University Press of Kentucky. They're going to have a good day. It's 311 pages and $40. And this is a wonderful selection of essays to show John Y.'s breadth and character, in fact. Just a wonderful person. We all miss him greatly. In fact, I think at this point it's not a bad idea to at least have our third author here, John Y. Simon. And here is the papers of U.S. Grant, which are still available, by the way. John Y., 1933 to 2008. He began his career as a stock boy here at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop at 18 East Chestnut, the other one. He always said that I had his job. And I always told him I'm happy that he had his. We got a lot more out of him than if he was doing this. Professor of history at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. He was director of the Ulysses S. Grant Association and editor of the papers of Ulysses S. Grant until his death. He's a Lifetime Achievement Award winner from the Lincoln Forum and winner of the Lincoln Prize in 2005. I have to note at this point that John Y.'s respect for the Cubs does not necessarily reflect the views of virtual book signing. Nonetheless, he is a beloved character, and these essays would show you why if you get into them. Where to begin? Both your books actually talk a bit about memory. And since that is such a huge subject, I thought today I would bring in a book that would begin the discussion of memory. So here is this already is a book. You can see how thick this thing is. and it's called The 7-Mile Funeral Cortege of General Grant, New York, August 8th of 1885. This was done by the U.S. Instantaneous Photographic Company, 7-Mile Funeral Cortege, as I said, and it contains about 78 albumin prints mounted above printed captions. It's in a beautiful Morocco and gilt binding. This was made actually to show off in hotel lobbies, basically. And what they did was have this wonderful, here's an advertisement for it, and the stand that they would have and put into the hotel lobbies. And this is going to go to memory because here we are memorializing the man at the time. And as we'll talk about, and as you do in the book, that how Grant had to be revived, and John Y. Simon helped do that. But just let me show you a couple of these photos in here. Here is in the harbor, the Atlantic Squadron is giving a salute. In fact, you can even see the guns going off in this particular one. Here in our carriages going down the street in the funeral. These are huge albumin photographs, late albumin photographs, I should say, because there is a change. Here is the vault that he was first put in, and they're waiting now for the cortege to come there. And this is just the sort of thing that people would have wanted to come into a hotel. They would see this and probably flip through this. Here is the room in which he died. And there are numerous photographs in here, laying in state, army camps in Riverside Park, several views, more of the procession, and tributes and the crowds that gathered. And there were various versions of this with various versions of photographs. There's some with a little bit more than this, some with less. So this is a piece that we can talk about as beginning of our memory questions. It certainly shows how memory study began earlier on, and for a long time his presidency was seen as awful, but this is what came out. The people came out in droves for him and remembered him differently than we are today, and John Y. helped rehabilitate him. Absolutely. I'm going to first start with your book and how you got to this.
Well, John had conceived of this at one point, and unfortunately never got around to collecting his essays on Lincoln and Grant himself. So I knew that was something that had been on his mind, and when he died in July 2008, the idea immediately struck me that it would be worthwhile to share these essays, which were published in various places, never collected before. And so I approached University Press of Kentucky. They were interested in the project, and so we have the book. Mm-hmm. John was a friend of mine of long-standing, almost 30 years. I began as a historical editor, documentary editor, they're sometimes called, in the historical field. And John was extremely helpful to me. At that time, I was an early American historian, and he forgave me for that. We spent 30 years talking about the Civil War, my real love, and him appreciating the fact that I was interested myself in both Lincoln and Grant. So those things really came together. And were the background for this book.
I found John Simon he was such a wit and droll at that. Yes. I love him for two things that he said about the Springfield Presidential Library for Lincoln. He first of all talked about the rubber Lincolns that are in there, but he called the whole deal Six Flags Over Lincoln. Yes. And so I've always enjoyed that. Kevin, let's go flip a little bit and tell us about Remembering the Crater and how you got to this particular book.
Well, the book specifically started out in a summer seminar at the University of Virginia back in 2001, I think. I was in a room with a bunch of other high school teachers, with Gary Gallagher and Will Thomas, both at the University of Virginia. And we were studying, the teacher seminar was on memory, and we were talking about, I think we were talking about Carol Reardon's book on Pickett's Charge, and at some point, the name of William Mahone came up, and we were asked to identify William Mahone. And I know a little bit of Civil War history, but I could not, for the life of me, say anything about Mahone. And the question was really meant to get us to think about why we haven't heard about Mahone specifically. And that led me to the reading of the only biography of Mahone that was written in 1935 by Nelson Blake. And once you read about Mahone, you cannot but be intrigued by his story. And so, given his role at the Crater, I started thinking about him. And when I ended up at graduate school for history at the University of Richmond a few years later, I had the chance to go back and think about Mahone, his connection to the Crater. And by that point, I had been thinking about the concept of historical memory since reading David Blight's Race and Reunion, which had only been recently published.
Yes, we had him here on the
right.
broadcast.
And so those two things converged. And while in graduate school, I had the chance to think about the concept of historical memory and how Mahone specifically fit into that. And from that, it turned into a book about the Crater.
Since you have this memory blog, and if you
Yes.
can remember, tell us what is memory as opposed to history? How do historians approach memory, and can memory change?
I think when I think about historical memory, I tend to think of sort of taking a step back from what we think of as objective history, the story of what happened. And what historians do, of course, is we tell stories about the past. And even if you're not a historian, we all tell stories about the world that we live in, how it became this way. We tell stories about ourselves over time, and those stories tend to change if we're very attentive to the personal stories we tell about ourselves. You'll notice that they change over time. And so for me, historical memory is sort of in that line where we're looking at how the stories we tell about ourselves, the broader communities in which we live in, the nation, how those stories over time change, and quite often why they change, what pressures influence, who gets to tell the stories about the nation, what becomes embedded as the official history, and how those stories change and why.
Well, what about the Rashomon effect, the Japanese film where numbers of different people see the same thing happen in front of the event and they see it totally differently? Can one's own reality transcend the truth then?
Can one's own reality transcend the truth? I would probably say no. I think each of us does come to our own personal interpretation, and we work together.
Yeah.
If we're working as historians, we work together to compare the interpretations based on the evidence, the available evidence that we're working with, what we come up with, and we challenge one another, I think, to defend our specific interpretations, and then at least in a professional setting, we hope to arrive at some kind of firm interpretation. But those are always in flux for the very reason that the objective history may be one thing, but we're always sort of struggling to approach it.
So collective memory can change.
Absolutely.
And does.
Especially in the context of the Civil War, and we're seeing that happen now.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And the Rashomon effect is one in which you have, as you mentioned, conflicting accounts of a single event. And so the historian has the job of reconciling those conflicting accounts. But each generation of historians may take the same 6 or 7, let's say, pieces of evidence, if that's what you've got, and reconcile them differently, because each generation of historians can only look at the past through its particular eyes of the present. And so the prism changes, quite frankly, as historians look to that past, trying to reconcile conflicting evidence. And doing so, it's inevitable that you're going to interpret the past according to your own present. Though you try not to, and that's the objective, is in fact to be as objective as possible. But it turns out to be a futile ideal.
It's difficult to take the self out of
It
anything.
is indeed, and the present out of the past.